Brad Beer, welcome to the Run2PB live event. How you going, Brad?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, going well. Apologies, I jumped on a little late, misread the time, but here we are.
That's all good. All good. It's a bit of a crazy time around Australia, around the world, really. And time is, I don't even know what day it is, to be honest. But
Yeah.
it is a bit crazy.
I think the only saving grace is running, I think, for many of us.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's how are you finding it up there? Because have you noticed a bit of a running? We'll give you it. We're just waiting for a few more people to jump on, and then we'll roll into the introductions. But just in terms of things up your way, and I'm in Melbourne, and there's we're sort of lockdown 2.0. People can still exercise and run, but they're not in gyms. And you guys up on the Gold Coast, a lot of running going on.
Yeah, well, obviously, the states are quite different, aren't they? But in terms of case numbers, etc., and lockdown versus not lockdown. So, Zach, I've heard of the observable numbers of increased runners that some of the southern states have seen. I think it has happened in Queensland to a degree, but probably less noticeable. So there's always an active community, obviously, up here, typically all year round. So I personally haven't noticed too much on the observation front, but you do hear of a lot of people that have been doing some fitness challenges and trying to make the most of their downtime, or whatever restraints they've had around lockdown and work shutdowns by getting fitter, which is a tremendous thing. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that happening, Zach.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's roll into this, but I'll introduce all the viewers out there. So this is Run2PB. This is our third live stream event, and obviously in these times we've moved a lot of stuff online, and it's been great to sort of bring some value to the running community. And I wanted to get yourself on as one of Australia's leading physios, and we wanted to talk tonight about bone stress injuries. Bone stress and injury prevention for runners, and you've obviously been in the game for a while now, as both as an athlete and also as a physio. I'll bring up. I've got a bit of a slideshow here that we'll go through, and I'll just roll this in, and it talks about your background. So if you want to just give some of the viewers a bit of your background that aren't familiar with Brad Beer.
Oh, thanks, Zach. My background, I've been around endurance sports since the age of 10. I turned 40 at the end of the year. So that's, 30 years almost, which goes quick in some ways and slow in others. But so I really can't recall life without running. I remember one of the first recollections of running was watching Steve Moneghetti, I think at the Commonwealth Games or the Olympics, and I can't remember, it would have been around 1990 or maybe even anyway. I remember seeing Steve's running gait and thinking, I need to go and emulate how he moves his arms to be a good runner, as I went out down where we lived in New South Wales and did a little 2K run. But so I remember that was one of my earliest memories of running. But I've been around, my first love was triathlon. I fell in love with that in 1990 with the domestic televised triathlon series, and fervently set out to see what I could be like. And fortunately, I had a little bit of endurance talent. And so I think you gravitate to the things that you naturally got a bit of ability in. So I went pretty hard at that for a good 10 years, had a decent bike crash with a few nasty injuries, including a brain hemorrhage. And that coincided with the end of my junior triathlon life and the start of the senior years, and I just couldn't get it together off the back of the injuries, and started uni. That seeded the next 10 years of my life, which was university into owning a practice. And here I am another 10 years on, just very much entrenched in the running and triathlon space. So professionally, I run a practice on the Gold Coast, POGO Physio, and I have the pleasure of now assisting various entities, including Triathlon New Zealand and Athletics New Zealand, and some work at times with British Triathlon. So it's been a really fun journey, and one of the great fun things I've had the opportunity to do in Zach recent years is the physio work for the Super League Triathlon Series, which pre-COVID was racing, all around the world.
And I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, it might have been a year or two ago when you went over to, did you go to Ethiopia and Kenya or East Africa? And you sort of spend a bit of time over there immersing yourself in the running culture?
Yeah, that was Ethiopia in February this year, Zach, literally a week or two before everything really went upside down. So there was already sort of elements of it happening in China, obviously, at that stage on the way over. But yeah, I had some time in Ethiopia assisting Zane Robertson, oceanic marathon record holder, obviously one of the twin boys, Jake and Zane. And yeah, that was an incredible experience, Zach. And looking back now at what this year's turned out to be, I'm glad I got it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, we'll dig in a bit further, but I want to talk about, and we just touched on the mini running boom that's happening even in Melbourne, just with more people out running. But overall, broadly, there's been a lot more running been going on globally, and I think with the advent of park run and other events that have come on, that we're starting to see, and we'll go into some of these trends and just bring this slide up. As a physio and someone involved closely with the sport, you've obviously seen a lot of runners coming through the doors.
Yeah, definitely, Zach. And what a tremendous thing, as we all know. I mean, there is not a person on the planet that's health wouldn't benefit from some consistent running in their life. And, of course, we know people that wouldn't identify themselves as runners or would think they're 1,000 miles away from being a runner. But as we both know, a runner's just someone that pops a pair of shoes on and goes for a trot. So it's absolutely fantastic. And here you can see on this slide the State of Running 2019 report, which was an incredible analysis of race results. As you can see there on the screen, 70,000 events, 108 million results. And some of the key takeaways, as you can see, 57% growth in 10 years, very slight drop off in the last 2 years, but nothing too substantial. Triathlon's been obviously was on a big boom, and it sort of just dropped back a little bit in the last few years. One of the great findings is the average age of runners, the mean age has increased by circa 5 years over these decades. So in other words, we are running into our later years, and some people are picking up in the later years, which is fantastic. In addition, for the first time in history, there was more female runners than males. So we've all probably been privy to that boom in the female running population. So all in all, it's just fantastic to see.
It is, yeah, and I just see it around. I live in Melbourne, and I see it at the Tan, and I see it out on the trails, and I see more people involved, more people getting into the sport, which is great, and seeing the benefits of running. But I guess with that comes, as runners, as you get into running, the worst thing not the worst thing, but it is a challenging time is when you get injured. And I've had many injuries over I've been running 20 plus years, and I've been through the stress fractures, stress reactions, all the rest of it. And as a runner, it really plays on you, and you really want to do everything possible to try and prevent injuries. And there's part of why I wanted to get you on and talk about that. And I guess one of the big areas you sort of specialize in and have spoken a lot over the years is bone stress. And I wanted to sort of pull on that thread a bit more. And you've developed a bit of an injury continuum that you could talk us through. I'll bring that up now.
Yeah, thanks for popping that up on the screen there, Zach. So injury is unfortunately going to be part of every runner's year often. So hopefully we get through years without them, but the statistics are stacked against us, and that is that most of us will get some sort of injury within 12 months of running. And, there's certainly people that point to that and say, well, aren't you better off not to run then if you get injured? But the deconditioning effects are far worse than working through a running injury, obviously. And then, as you said, Zach, they're never fun and they're frustrating. But one of the big areas, if runners are going to get really one of three things: joint-related concerns, knee pain, kneecap pain, hip joint, or bone or tendon injuries. So it's really those things that present in terms of my professional work, and those things, if you're talking to a mate at a park run, a friend at a park run, that will probably say, oh, I've got this or that, it's likely to land in one of those three buckets. And obviously tonight's geared towards bone stress injuries. And I think most runners, if they've done enough years, at some point will have probably developed a bit of bone stress injury, And this one pager here is something I give out in clinic just to help people in a concise-ish manner capture what actually happens. So would you like me just to sort of talk through the stages here?
Maybe just work through that. Yeah, those stages that you've got down here, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, no problem. So I think the first thing to point out is that our bones are not static, dead levers. They are living, breathing structures that bend, they flex, they break down after every really run. There's some micro damage we accrue to the outside of the bone, the cortex, and then to the intermedullary bone, or the honeycomb stuff, if you like, inside. So there's a level of trauma, micro trauma, after every run. And then our bodies are incredibly smart. They go to work, and at a cellular level in the bone, that bone is repaired, and that cycle just gets repeated. Now, it's a continuum that occurs with our bones after they've been loaded. On the far left-hand side, there is normal bone remodeling, where the breakdown rate is being met by the repair rate. So it's pretty commonsensical there. On the very extreme end of this continuum, you've got a fracture, a complete or frank fracture, a bone that's split. And obviously that's nasty. But if we go right back over to the far left there, normal remodeling. If we start to do more load-in cycles so running, there's more load-in cycles for the bone, then we're going to start to see an increased level of remodeling. There's more breakdown, and there's hopefully more build-up. At that point, and that's the aim of the running game, isn't it? We all want to improve, do more, go faster. So there's more load-in cycles occurring. But if we keep going, which we do, because that's the aim of the game, we may find ourselves in that next little segment there, which is a bit of a stress reaction. And the top green line there says pathology continuum. So pathology denotes, obviously, when something's wrong. And that's where a runner will typically, Zach, feel some pain, be it in a shin, a thigh bone, a foot bone, or wherever. And at that point, the remodeling attempt of the body is being outpaced by the breakdown. So there's just not enough time for the bones to heal themselves, if you like. And therefore, we're walking towards greater pain and greater injury classification along this continuum, all the way up to the commonly touted stress fracture.
No, that's really comprehensive there. I know obviously you dig deeper when you are with your clients, but I think it's a good way, a good one pager, like you said, to sort of show where things can start and almost end up, and how it all goes through those processes. Just moving along, I wanted to go a bit further about the sort of risk factors, and you've identified them here as two distinct groups, biomechanical and biological. Do you want to walk us through those points there?
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. I just had a thought there, which might, I think, be useful for runners of any level listening. That continuum, it's not something that I used to look at that and envision that as something we work slowly through, and that we had a lot of time to go from each step. But you can actually move quite quickly into a state of a serious bone stress injury. So the takeaway there is, if you've got a sore bony bit, and it's easy on the shin, a bit harder sometimes in the thigh and the neck of the femur, but if something feels up, really take heed of that. And it's not easy to do, but let's take 2 or 3 days off and then see if it's still there in 2 or 3 days' time. And if it is, speak to your coaches, and get the help that you need, because the quicker you get onto these things, obviously the better, goes without saying. But Zach, this slide here, there's two components to a bone stress injury in terms of risk factors, the biomechanical and the biological factors. And if we get rid of those fancy terms and just strip it down into basics, the biomechanical factors are simply the load being applied to our bones. So that makes sense. On the other side, we've got to then think like a bone. So often trying to educate runners to do this, like think like your shin bone for a minute, or think like your thigh bone. And this is where we're talking about the bone's ability to deal with the forces, to deal with the loads. So we've got to consider both of these if we're going to have a comprehensive or good rehabilitation process for someone that's injured. It's no good doing what often can happen, and that's just considering the left side here, or the forces going on the bone. And did we make a training error with the program, but neglecting to consider thinking like a bone and how's the bone going over there in terms of its health?
I guess that's that holistic program as well, where you're really working. Your coach has really got to be across a lot of those factors in developing the program, and looking at the surface they're running on. Definitely, obviously, training patterns, and building in recovery where needed, and just to drag back to that point you had earlier about when things you do pull up a little bit sore, and I think, and I'm working with a lot of athletes at the moment who, when there's no races on, it's like, well, what's the risk? Let's have a day off. Let's have 2 days off, because I'd rather have 2 days off and be running for the next couple of months than have push through it and end up out with a stress fracture or something. So it really is it's a balancing act, and applying all those factors, and then obviously the biological factors as well that play, that you can go into there as well.
Yeah, it's forever a balancing act, and these things aren't all visible, like there aren't. So if we went and, you see bone stress on an MRI, if we went and just hypothetically put everyone through an MRI on the start of Saturday's park run for both shins, we're going to see most runners with a degree of bone stress, but not all of them with pain, because they're not progressed along there. So these are invisible things that happen. And this is probably one of my big passions in practice, is hopefully increasing the awareness of what's circled here on the right-hand side, Zach, and that's the energy availability bullet point and the bone health bullet point. I've largely really lent into this in the last 5-6 years of my professional life. Yes, out of professional necessity, but also for my own personal journey as a runner who picked up low bone density several years ago off the back of a string of bone stress injuries to my femur, and really have been on a bit of a quest to try and raise awareness of this ever since. And can I share briefly around those bullet points, Zach?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, go into those. That'd be great.
Oh, well, easy. The first one there is this concept of energy availability, and it's pretty straightforward at a conceptual level. If we do more, if we train more, our energy needs are greater, right? If we go from 1 hour of running a week to, say, 2 or 3 or 4 hours over time, there's a 400% greater need for fueling for that work rate. Now, what do we often do with athletes that are running around jobs and families and other responsibilities? Our eating patterns often don't change, but our volume or our workload overall, which is obviously also a factor of intensity, goes up. And we will look at, often, many runners do look at the scale and see stable weight or weight reduction and think, right, well, this is trending well. We all know weight is the enemy of fast running to a certain degree. And it can easily put us in a position of an energy deficit. Simple terms, we're not getting enough energy to sustain not only our training, but also life's processes. So when we sleep, our brains are working, our vital organs are ticking over. We do our jobs, our brains consuming an enormous amount of calories. It takes an enormous amount of fuel to fuel a human body. And when we go and layer on top the demands of running, we're often in a deficit of having not enough energy available. And the consequences of that can be quite dire. Our bones may not be prioritized for health, and our sexual reproductive axis, if you like, can be disturbed. And for women, that can have effects on different things, for men as well. And it's easy to not know you're in a deficit of energy availability, and that's where the trap lies. And this is not to say we should all stop exercising, of course not, but the message is, I think most runners can probably eat more than they think they need, and they're heading in the right direction. Hopefully that's music to a few people's ears.
Yeah. Have you found that this is a real trending issue, or not, that is coming to the fore in your practice, that you're seeing a lot more, and you're having to basically rewire or reconfigure how people view this, I guess, misconception around what they need to be doing fuel-wise, and even looking after themselves with stress and all the rest of it? Definitely.
There is the old terminology for this was the female athlete triad, where a female athlete with amenorrhea, so an absence of their menstrual cycle, low bone density, were labeled, they've got the female athlete triad. The problem with that, which the IOC, International Olympic Committee, recognized about 7 years ago, was that half the running population are men. So the female athlete triad is better, positioned, which they now have done with this concept of energy availability deficit, or the term which many people will start to see more and more is RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport. So there is a growing emergence, and a lot more needs to come to the fore. And anyone that ever presents in the clinic with me, I am really tuned in to see if there's any signs or subtleties that might indicate they may have a lack of energy. And like 100 calories deficit a day, we can fall into that very easily. Like 100 calories is nothing, and we'll get away with that over the short term. But if we are 100 calories down over a year, which can happen very easily, that's equivalent to not eating for a whole month.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, no one in their right mind would go and do that as an athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really that fueling your body to do the work. And when you're doing this sort of as you get more progressive with your running, you're doing some big workouts, and you're like you said, juggling work, family life, stress. And it can have a spiraling effect. So I'm glad you brought that to our attention and bring that up here. Is there anything else on there that you wanted to just talk about in a little bit more detail?
Just briefly, I'd say this: for female athletes, it's a little bit easy to know if you're in potentially some energy deficit. Your menstruation cycle, the period, is the scorecard. Leaving aside the complexities that oral contraceptive pill use will create, where it's not a true cycle, it's a withdrawal bleed. But if you're a female runner and your cycle has become irregular, please take note of that. Speak to the relevant health professional, notify your coach if you're just not sure. But it's normally one of the first indicators, Zach, that the energy availability is just not there. For the men, the male runners, obviously that scorecard's not so obvious. And the blood tests can paint a bit of a guide for both male and female runners with the sex hormones. If those sex hormones are suppressed, that can be a bit of an indicator. It's a bit harder to diagnose in males. But really, if you're a male that's had a string of bone stress injuries, or a female, that can be a good indicator that, hey, I better consider my fueling. And it's also a good indicator, Zach, to consider your bone health. Bone health meaning how dense are your bones? And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of cases with repetitive bone stress injuries where the bone density is just south of where it would ideally be. And you could imagine in those circumstances, it's no good just talking about training loads when we need to also address the underlying health of the bone.
And just following on that, there's actually a slide here showing Ryan Hall. And I don't know if people are following him on Instagram. He definitely looks a lot different now. He's been hitting the gym very hard. But this is a really good illustration, and it proves your point around that energy. He was obviously, you can see the comments there, and you might want to talk about that a little bit more just on this photo.
Yeah, this was one of Ryan's Instagram posts, Zach, and I captured it for any of the sort of presentations I give around bone stress injuries. And I just think it's a great example. And on the left, there's Ryan setting his 2:04, still American marathon record. What a stellar run. On the right, Ryan there had noted that he was 133 pounds on the right. He was 133 pounds on the right, 137 pounds on the left. And he ran a 2:18. And by his standards, as a 2:04 guy or runner, he said he didn't even look up at the result, but he thinks it was around 2:08, 2:18. And the difference was that on the right, he was trying to be, in his words, Kenyan lean, so mimic the look of the East Africans. And on the left, he was not even worrying about that. He was just getting the training done, recovering and building. And I think the takeaway there is lighter is definitely not always better. So there's a tipping point. So if you're in surplus with kilos, then that's probably something that over time, and that's the key, you can move towards energy neutrality or energy balance over time. The leanest athletes are often the athletes that are in the best energy balance, unless they've acutely got there through example like Ryan's, where he's been energy restricting through caloric restriction, and his performance suffered. His health would have been suffering there. So if we forget the health side, which I touched on before, then if we consider the performance side, there's not a runner out there on the planet that wants to perform worse. So, I honestly see a shift away from people looking at the scales. And if you can get to the start line, you don't have to be at your leanest weight all year round. You only need to be there for the races you want to perform at your best in. The other times of the year, it's okay to be a little bit over what you think you might need. As long as you're on the start line and not injured, you're going to do well.
Yeah, and look, I wanted to maybe just take a couple of questions in. I had one here that I'll pop up on the screen here. And now it's saying it's often stated in the sports that the practitioner should treat the person, not the scan. If so, why do we often see a rather generic protocol in treatment of common overuse injuries such as tendinopathy and bone stress related injuries? Have you got something there that you want to come back there with, Brad?
Oh gosh, well, thanks for the question. I guess I'm smiling because the last consultation I did before I finished my day, came home and jumped on the call here, was a runner via an online consult in France. A British guy lives in France, and he was frustrated because he'd spent the better part of 7-8 months following generic recommendations. And one of the first things for a tendinopathy I said was there's no recipes, there's principles for rehab, but there's always, it's an individual application. So I guess that's why I'm smiling. But the first part here is you should treat the person and not the scan. Definitely. I mean, we're not treating a sore shin, are we? We're treating Zach, who's got a world that looks like this, who wants to run for this reason. I remember seeing a runner who told me that she wanted, her aim was to run, it was the Gold Coast Marathon. And I said, okay, great. I understand that's important to you. Why is that important to you? And Zach, she paused for a little bit, and then she shared that her daughter had passed away from cancer only a year or two prior, and she'd spent the better part of 3 or 4 years looking after her daughter. And then she felt like this was a way of kind of honoring her daughter and getting the most out of her own life. And so it was important to her for that reason. So that's a very different journey, isn't it, to just get into the start line? So yeah, absolutely. And then the second part of that, so it's always the person, not the scan. Have we got that there again, Zach? The second part.
I'll bring it up.
It was about generic.
Yeah, it was probably more around, using, I guess, generic, let me just bring it up again, mate.
Generic protocol in treatment. I mean, I don't know the application, but look, the principles are fairly generic. The principles of rehab are really quite simple. 2 sides, calm stuff down. On the other side, build stuff up. Calm stuff down, build stuff up. Running rehabilitation is always generally strength and conditioning and graded return to running. It's almost comical with how simple the concepts are. The application, however, should always be individualized. And so I'm not sure anymore on the context here, but tendinopathy and bone stress related, sure, the concepts are generic, they're basic concepts, but the application is highly individualized. And hopefully the question asker here hasn't sort of run into a brick wall there, and so to speak, with not getting that. But if you get in generic stuff, you don't feel like it's individualized, and probably look further afield.
And I think you'll probably notice that, I know when runners get injured, they might go on Google and they you end up in a Let's Run forum and you're 10 pages deep, and you've almost self-diagnosed yourself, and then you speak to someone else, or then, I think with so much information out there that people do get a little bit lost. And I think it's important to communicate with professionals like yourself to get a plan, and you obviously want to get people running and get them back moving, and that rehab stage is a movement plan, to get them running.
Yeah, definitely. And there's only really two reasons people get stuck, Zach. One's a wrong diagnosis, so misdiagnosed from the start, and the second is generally not being pushed hard enough with strength and conditioning. They're the two reasons I see people get stuck with injuries that niggle longer than they need to. That's not to say that even with the right application of treatment, things don't take time, like things like tendons can, but you should see some meaningful change along the way.
And in terms of, we've got a lot of masters runners and people who are sort of maybe getting into running a little bit later in life. Are there some basic tips around injury prevention that you could sort of draw upon, whether that's strength and conditioning, prehab exercises, recovery tools, anything that you can sort of pinpoint that would some of the viewers who are in that category could draw upon?
Yeah, it's a real passion of mine, Zach, the masters athlete, for sure. And there definitely are things that, with some awareness, can hopefully make a big difference in terms of a masters runner's enjoyment and reduction of injury risk. And they would be, and these are generic principles. So the prior question there really, seeds this. The generic principles are prioritize strength and conditioning over stretching and mobility. So it's a bit of an old tradition that keeps rolling, that we, for some reason, as runners need to stretch. I haven't stretched anything for a good 15, 20 years. And that's not to say that you can't do those things, but we're often time poor as masters runners. And so if we've got 40 minutes a week to throw towards stewarding our body, trying to help our body stay out there on the running track, then it's going to be better spending 40 of the 40 minutes that are available on doing strength and conditioning, because as masters runners, we are, unfortunately, from 30 to 60, losing about 30% of our strength. And the area where we lose the most strength is the plantar flexors, which is simply the calf musculature, the gastroc and soleus. So first tip would be prioritize strength work over things like stretching. The second tip would be work on those calves. They are the area where masters runners lose the most strength. And as a result, it's no surprise that masters runners athletes tend to suffer from related injuries, calf strains, plantar fasciitis or fasciopathy, and also Achilles tendon problems. Whereas younger runners tend to get more bony stuff in general terms, so kneecap pain, etc. So we'll work on the calves, and you can do calf raises, standing at home, single leg. But ideally, and this is probably the third point, getting in a gym as a masters runner is a fantastic investment of time and resource. And it doesn't have to be every day, of course. It can be 30, 40 minutes twice a week doing isolated work to strengthen up the muscles in the running body.
And Brad, you thanks for that. And now I know a lot of the masters athletes will take a lot from that. But also, you mentioned you work with Zane and Jake Robertson going over to Kenya, and you've worked with a lot of elite triathletes and runners and over the journey. Is there a bit of a trend that you see that these guys and girls do to look after their body? Not to say they get injured less, they probably get injured just as much as a recreational runner, but maybe some things that you notice that recreational runners could potentially use in their, maybe take on board some of the things they do and utilize?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. Their injury rates aren't necessarily any different to the recreational runner. Probably the big observation is the respective recovery, and you can look at it through the lens of their full-time athletes, so they've got more time available, but they also have just learned to recognize, and this is one of my favorite quotes that's not mine, it's Shona Halson from the Australian Institute of, formerly the Australian Institute of Sport Recovery Centre. So she ran the athlete recovery at 3 or 4 Olympic cycles for Australia, and then based herself out of the Australian Institute of Sport, did research in recovery. And her adage is, we're only benefiting from the training we're recovering from. So when you think about that, and I remember hearing that and thinking, I recall doing my long runs on a Sunday. I'd often do them on a Sunday. And then I'd be pretty knackered come the Monday morning. Yet I was like, I want to get my week off to a good start, bank a few Ks. I've got to get at least 10 Ks done. And I was normally pulling myself out of bed, just dragging myself to get there, about to go out and work a 10-hour day and run around. And I think back and thought, if you reflect on that statement, we're only benefiting from the training we're recovering from. I surely would have been better off to have an extra couple of hours in bed and actually bank that long run. So they really respect recovery. I recall Zane in Ethiopia, Zach, commenting that the body knows the difference between watching Netflix and actually having a sleep. That's the degree that sometimes they're that pedantic about, hey, I don't have to walk fast to the shop. Why would I? I can walk slowly. Now, that's a different world, but the principles can apply to us as recreational runners.
And I think as you run more, you become more in tune with your body, and you start to realize what works for you. And I know as a coach, I'm constantly, a lot of the time, trying to pull people back to do more. It's great to be enthusiastic, but there's actually more benefits in slowing your easy runs down, recovering, and so we can hit those harder sessions harder, because, it's sort of that 80-20 rule, isn't it? 80% of the time we are actually just cruising along, and then you want to be able to dip in at that 20% of the time and really go after it then.
For sure. And I like that you said that, it's good to be enthusiastic, but it's better to be consistent, right? Out there, building. I mean, I've fallen into the trap just as much as anyone, where we get overly enthusiastic and, do a bit more than we thought we would. And it's a frustratingly enjoyable journey.
And just we'll start to wind it up, but there was a thought around the role you play when you work with coaches as well, and how does that fit in? Do you sort of have a collaborative approach in terms of working with a lot of athletes? I'm guessing you're in contact with your coaches and how their programs work in line with, say, a rehab or even preventing injuries, getting in there before they actually happen.
Yeah, that's such a great question, comment, Zach. I always say this: if a runner comes in with an injury and they've got a coach, we're all on the same page. We all want the same thing. Every single party that's involved, the coach, the athlete, the therapist, and anyone else, parents, if that's the case. And so if we're all on the same page, then there's no way we can get the best outcome unless we're all communicating. So I like to make the distinction very clear for the athlete and all parties involved, for myself as well, that as a therapist, I am not a coach. I stay in my lane. I'm a therapist. So if I'm working with an injured runner, my responsibility, if we sort of think back to that slide about biomechanical and biological factors, I'm largely responsible for what I call the return, or wholly responsible in collaboration, of course, for the return to run program. So I like to think of it as tissue training versus fitness training. This sort of helps drive home concepts. And when I'm sketching out return to run programs, which might start typically, say, like a bone stress injury with a walk, jog, first run for quite a few weeks, I'll get the athlete to write in parentheses tissue training, not fitness training. And then communicating with the coach, sending copies of the program, letting them know at all stages until my sort of get off the bus for scripting out the return to run program, Zach. The thresholds or the line in the sand is normally once the volumes are restored and they've been able to absorb a bit of speed work again. And at that point, it's like, all right, coach is fully back in the box. And we just keep ticking along as we need to with strength and conditioning upgrades, but the program's back in the coach's hands. So that should be and obviously the coach will be talking as we go around, what do you think about this? So it's just a two-way street. It's there's no other way to do it than to be communicative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's great you can have that. And I know there would be some challenges at times because the athletes and coaches, they would just want to get out there, but then having that dialogue where you can get them back in the safest way and taking a long-term approach. Hey, your thoughts just, and this is a question without notice, just wanted to get your opinion on the carbon shoes and the advent of technology, I guess, on running in the last sort of few years. I mean, there's been obviously recovery things like, your Normatex and all that stuff has happened, but then, ice bars, and there's been that evolution. But now you're starting to see that technology side, going onto the feet and having a real impact on times. Do you have a view on that evolution and where it's all going?
Yeah, it's
open a can of worms.
Oh no, I mean it's I just love progress. I think you can't stop it. And, you can put parameters around it, but I'm a big fan of technology improvements. I think that's life, isn't it? We get better in every aspect, including footwear. So I've certainly never really dug a firm line in the sand around being a purist and not progressing technologies. But certainly they've changed. My gosh, I recall the early 2010s to 2015. It was the minimalist movement, right? It was get less meat under your shoe.
Born to run type sort of setup.
Yeah. Born to run really spawned that whole sort of, as you remember, that whole, minimalist movement. And then Hoka One popped their head up and came out with this maximalist type shoe with all this stack height. And you wouldn't have picked that to do well in a million years. And yet here we are in 2020 and minimalist shoe sales have fallen off a cliff and maximalist shoe sales are, just on the rise and rise. And now you see every brand adopting more meat under the shoe. And it's such a big area. There are pros and cons. There are times when you might want to run it with less meat under their shoe, more minimalist approach. And there are times when you want to run it potentially with more meat under their shoe. And let alone going anywhere near throwing carbon in the sole, which, in terms of the speed effect, it's more about the foams used so much than the plate. But yeah, it's a big time. It's a big change. And the one underlying commonality, no matter what phase in history you are with shoes, is the runner's body has to be conditioned for the given workload. They have to be absorbing the training and they have to have enough capacity to be able to absorb the training in terms of their body. So no matter what era we're in, those things never change and they're the big drivers. So whatever happens with shoes will happen, but let's not neglect the big things.
Yeah, spot on. It's that kind of thing where, you just because you buy a pair of 95, 4% of the next percent, it doesn't automatically guarantee your PB if you haven't done any training. And it's the same with any technology, any of these improvements. I mean, there was an evolution to racing flats back in the day, and then people didn't just automatically run fast because they got racing flats. They still had to do all the other things that make you run fast. So, but yeah, it is certainly interesting times. I know as a smaller guy, I've been enjoying the stack height because I've been able to grow a few inches having the hockers and the extra foam in the shoes. But hey, we'll probably just I think we'll just see if we've got another question come in. But other than that, mate, I know your podcast is very popular. That's going really well. I'll just bring down this slide just so people can have a look where they can follow you. So you've obviously got the Physical Performance Show, which is a fantastic podcast, and then you've got a book out as well. Like, you're everywhere, mate.
Oh, it's just probably channeling my ADHD, Zach, into various projects. But yeah, the podcast is a weekly show, Zach, which has been going for about 4.5 years, and the big passion there is just to share learnings. And so we bring in expert commentary around different themes, whether it's running biomechanics or tendon rehab, or recorded an episode today around the science of breath. What can we learn around breathing as runners, and can we train our respiratory muscles to make a difference? So interesting stuff. So, mate, yeah, that goes out every week across all the normal platforms for podcasts, the Physical Performance Show. And I try and run a bit of a Q&A every Monday evening over on the Facebook page, just my name there, Brad Beer, and try and pop out some hopefully helpful content as I can on Instagram. So, and then there's the book, which is a few years young now, if you like, and in its second edition, You Can Run Pain Free, which at the time was the conglomeration of the key messages I felt like I was sharing when I commonly at that time in my career. And I feel like it's time to almost upgrade that and get contemporary with a few other messages. So hopefully working on something again soon.
Yeah, awesome. No, I really appreciate you jumping on, Brad. It's I know there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to cover, but I think it's just good to get in and talk about these things, and people can obviously get in touch with you. Your website's got a lot of information on the POGO Physio side, and you're obviously doing consults as well online as well during these times. So you're doing a fair bit around that as well.
Yeah, Zach, online consults, certainly something that I've enjoyed doing for many years, even pre-COVID. But the big reason they're so effective is running injuries, as long as an accurate diagnosis, which honestly 90% of any diagnosis will be found in the story, because a bone's going to behave a certain way, a tendon's going to behave a certain way. And hands-on therapies can be useful for reducing symptoms at times, but the real rehab is in the strength and conditioning. So that can be easily done online via app technology with exercises, etc. So, but yeah, it's a new world we live in, isn't it? Where just this week I've spoken to people in Chile, New Zealand, France today, America. It's an international globe, which I think is exciting, because there's just, there's nothing in terms of information that we can't get our hands on these days.
And it's just great that the sport is growing. There's more people running. You can see, as we touched on earlier, the participation rates are through the roof, and hopefully events can get going again, and we can continue that boom. But at least now we can still run, and hopefully the tips and the information you imparted tonight will help a few more people out there to continue to run pain-free.
Yeah, that's great, Zach. Well done to Run2PB and all the crew and the great team you've got there. These things take a bit of work behind the scenes, so good on you guys for prioritising this for your crew.
No worries, mate. Yeah, and hopefully you can get up to the Gold Coast soon enough, and catch up and have a beer.
Yeah, well, let's all look forward to 2021 Gold Coast Marathon. Hey, I mean, how good will that start line feel when we all get there? Hopefully 2021.
Yes, I think we're all going to have a real appreciation for the Gold Coast Marathon again, for sure.
For any event, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. All right, mate. You take care. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
See you guys.